Today we're going over my Deathless Tier 100 Nightmare Dungeon clear with Tornado. And we're going to go over the entire build, how to play it, and skills, Paragon, gear, all that good stuff. So Tornado Stormwolf is, in my opinion, close to a perfect pushing build. It's got everything. It's got the damage, tons of damage reduction, very high armor, a ton of life with how I've built it here. We're at like 16,000 life. Great spirit management. And insane mobility, unstoppable. You can't be crowd controlled the majority of the time. It's got pretty much everything going for it there. General gameplay is also very, very simple for the most part. Tornadoes will actually home in on enemies, so you don't really necessarily even have to aim them. Now, most of the time you are kind of dropping them like right on top of an enemy, and they're going to move around, home in on enemies, and deal damage for you while also healing you over their duration. So for the most part, the general gameplay is you're going to just consistently be moving. You're going to stutter step, drop tornadoes, kite enemies around. We're also slowing enemies that are poisoned, so we can kind of crowd control them that way as well. We can move freely through enemies, so that makes our mobility even better, where we can just really position ourselves wherever we need to go. And again, we don't really have to worry as much about where we place the tornadoes. So we can really focus in on movement and positioning and making sure we're in the proper spot to not get ourselves into too much danger. Now, I've built this tankier than you probably need to, but I wanted to make it so that I felt pretty comfortable running just about any Tier 100 dungeon. This is a Blind Burrows. This is one of the easier dungeons, if not the easiest to run. You've got basically just melee enemies, which is perfect for this build. And Druid damage reduction is very situational. We've got damage reduction from close enemies, damage reduction to poisoned enemies, damage reduction while fortified, damage reduction after using a defensive skill, damage reduction after using a basic skill, Storm Strike, damage reduction after we hit an enemy with Storm Strike, which we got to be in melee range for that. Tons of different situational damage reductions. When you have everything up, you're very tanky, along with the crazy healing from the masochistic spirit boon. But if you don't have all that stuff going at the same time, you can feel very squishy. So potentially against a ranged mob, if they hit you off screen from like a ballista archer or something like that, you can easily get one shot. So a dungeon like this with a bunch of melee mobs is your best bet, the easiest to clear. You definitely need to get close to ranged enemies, archers, and things like that quickly. Get your damage reductions up, get that stuff going so that they don't kill you. So Blind Burrows has 3 elites that you have to kill in 3 different rooms throughout the dungeon. Once you kill them, a barrier drops, and then you can go kill the boss. So for the most part, my strategy here was just to pretty much kite enemies into the different rooms with the elites that we had to kill them, get to the boss. So I didn't kill every elite in this entire dungeon. We easily could have. I mostly just kind of kited them in with the ones we had to kill, killed them there, and then definitely skipped some stuff. And it was mainly just because I wanted to see how quickly I could do this. You know, I think this clear was about a 7.5 minute clear. It would have been probably 12 minutes had I stopped and killed everything. But I think this build can do a Tier 100 of any of the Nightmare dungeons that are available. Some of them are going to be much more difficult than this, especially, you know, the ones with like the pink ghost mob types and things like that are going to be much more difficult. But I think it's definitely doable. Like I said, the build has everything. So as far as the rest of the abilities, Storm Strike, again, is our basic skill. You want to be weaving this in as you're casting tornadoes to get the DR from Storm Strike itself. We're also running the aspect of Might, which gives you DR for 6 seconds after using a basic skill. So you just kind of got to get used to weaving that in with the tornadoes. Pretty simple, really. Cyclone Armor is going to give us non-physical damage reduction passively. On active use, it's also going to knock enemies back. It does damage as well, so it has a lucky hit chance. So it can proc Earth and Might for us. You can use it as kind of a way to engage the enemies. So you kind of run in and hit Cyclone Armor right away. You can get the enemies poisoned. You can kind of move them around, stop them from doing whatever they're getting ready to do. You can also use it very defensively if you need to push something away from you. Cyclone Armor has a lot of uses there. Hurricane is going to be a little AoE around your character when you activate it that stays out for a duration. It's going to give us more DR to enemies that are affected by it. It's going to slow enemies. It can also crit, so it can just stay out and be critting, healing you with Masochistic, which is really nice. You're basically just going to use it on cooldown for the most part. As soon as it's back up, go ahead and hit it. Same with Blood Howl. It's going to be a heal. When you kill enemies, it reduces the cooldown of Blood Howl, and we're getting 15% attack speed for 3 seconds after using Blood Howl. So pretty much use it as soon as it's off cooldown, hit it. We're also running the Vigilance passive on the skill tree. That's 15% damage reduction after using a defensive skill for 6 seconds. So Blood Howl has great synergy with that, being off cooldown all the time. We also have Cyclone Armor, so when you use the active of that, that will also activate Vigilance. And then, of course, Grizzly Rage. You know, this is kind of the bread and butter of the build. We're unstoppable while we're in Grizzly Rage form. We're getting stacking crit damage, stacking damage. We're getting Fortify out of it. Spirit cost reduction, movement speed while we're in dire werewolf form, healing on kills. And so we're really trying to stack as much cooldown reduction as possible while also increasing the duration of Grizzly Rage and the dire werewolf form. So the boss here, there's nothing to really be too concerned about. It does move around a bunch, so that makes it take a little bit of time to kill. As long as you don't stand in the poison here, you're not going to have an issue. Bosses are one of the easiest things for Tornado. And like I said, we could be set up more offensively here to kill bosses quicker, kill elites quicker. And you can definitely go that route if you want to. But again, I think the overall smoothness of trying to push tier 100 Nightmare Dungeons will go down a good bit, and it'll be more frustrating. You're going to take deaths, you're going to die randomly to one-shots, and things like that. The way that I've got it set up here, I think, is one of the smoother ways to try to push with this build. The boss just moves around a bunch. You've also got, she does spawn the infested mob type, which, you know, they have on-death effects. In a dungeon like this, really the only thing that's scary is potentially a couple different on-death effects popping on you at the same time that could kill you. Next up, let's take a look at the gear. Now, I will have a planner in the description of this video with all the gear, stats, Paragon boards, all that stuff. But quickly, of course, we have the Tempest Roar. This is a Tempest Roar build. You have to have it. The build doesn't work without it. This allows us to synergize both Storm and Werewolf skills, while also giving us potentially Spirit back on lucky hits. For the chest piece, you really just want to go for all DR life stats. Right now we've got life, DR from close enemies, DR from poisoned, and then DR from distant, which isn't the greatest. I'd like to reroll this to something else, but this thing started to get pretty expensive to reroll. And then we're running the aspect of might. Basic skills grant 20% damage reduction for 6 seconds. You can also run the vigorous aspect, which gives you 15% damage reduction while in werewolf form. The nice thing about that is that's basically up all the time. This technically isn't, but as long as you play properly, it will be, and it's 5% more damage reduction than you can get out of vigorous. For the gloves, we've got crit chance, ranks to tornado, and attack speed. I would love to have lucky hit chance here. I need to get better gloves. Honestly, we're missing out on a ton of lucky hit chance. But the critical strike chance against injured enemies isn't the worst. So we're running that for the time being. This is imprinted with Mighty Storms. So this allows the Earthen Might key passive to also apply to our Storm skills. For pants, again, you want a bunch of damage reduction rolls here. And armor is also good. We're running Disobedience, which is going to give us stacking armor percentage as well. For boots, we're going for movement speed. We've got damage reduction while injured, total armor while in werewolf form, and then that lightning resistance is kind of wasted there. I'd probably just like to have all stats or willpower there instead. I really like 3 max evade charges for the boots. We're running Ghost Walkers here, which is going to give us movement speed while unstoppable, and we can move freely through the enemies. For the weapon, you definitely have a better weapon. This is just the highest item power damage per second weapon that I have. We do have a dead stat on here, but we got core skill damage, vulnerable damage, and willpower. The damage to stunned enemies, I'd like for that to be all stats. Then we have Storm Chasers. Tornado will seek up to 3 targets. For the totem, we're going for cooldown reduction, lucky hit chance, and then I've got 2 damage reduction rolls here. Damage reduction while fortified, damage reduction to poisoned enemies. You could potentially run crit chance over damage reduction while fortified here if you wanted to. Running retaliation, we're going to get more damage to our core skills, which tornado is a core skill, based on the amount of fortify that we have. For rings, you really want vulnerable damage, lucky hit chance, critical strike chance, and then probably your best bet is just maximum life as that last stat, but you can go for another potential damage stat if you want to. This is imprinted with accelerating aspect. Our critical strikes with core skills increase our attack speed by 25%. For the other ring, we've got Rampaging Werebeast. It's going to increase the duration of Grizzly Rage while also giving us a stacking critical strike damage increase for the duration of Grizzly Rage every time we crit. And then for the amulet, you want cooldown reduction, +3 ranks to the Envenom passive. And then I've got armor while in werewolf form, and then just flat damage reduction. This is imprinted with Dire Wolf's Necklace. This allows Grizzly Rage to shapeshift us into a dire werewolf. We gain movement speed, we gain spirit cost reduction, and then healing on kills. For gems, in your jewelry, you want skulls for armor. For the weapons, we're going with emeralds for critical strike damage to vulnerable enemies. And then in the armor, I'm actually going for maximum life gems. For a long time, I was running damage reduction while fortified gems. I've found that it's difficult to stay fortified in this build, especially when you're pushing 100s and you're taking so much damage all the time that it's just kind of inconsistent damage reduction. And I can tell you, when I switched to a higher maximum life version of this build, it smoothed everything out and made it so much easier. So I definitely recommend the rubies in your armor. For the skill tree, we've got 1 point in Storm Strike and 1 point in Enhanced Storm Strike. We've got to put 2 points in here to get down to the next cluster. Max points into Tornado, into Enhanced Tornado, into Raging Tornado to apply Vulnerable. We've also got 1 point in Heart of the Wild, into 3 points in Wild Impulses to increase our damage for Tornado. We've got Predatory Instinct, giving us increased critical strike chance against close enemies. And then 3 points into the movement speed here. Going down to the defensives, Cyclone Armor, into Enhanced Cyclone Armor, into Preserving Cyclone Armor, Blood Howl, Enhanced Blood Howl, and then Preserving Blood Howl. 1 point into Ancestral Fortitude so we can get over to the Vigilance passive for that damage reduction. We're getting 3 points into Elemental Exposure for extra vulnerable chance. 3 points into Endless Tempest to increase the duration of Hurricane. 1 point to Hurricane, Enhanced Hurricane for the slow, and then Savage Hurricane for the DR against enemies that are affected by Hurricane. We've got actually 3 points in Neurotoxin. You could easily put just 1 point here. I decided I actually kind of liked the extra slow here. So 1 point's just 8%. We've got a 24% slow to poisoned enemies. Enemies are pretty much always slowed in this build because we're poisoning with Toxic Claws. Critical strikes with werewolf skills deal 8% of their base damage as poisoning damage. And then, of course, our biggest damage increase on the skill tree is Envenom. Poison enemies take 30% additional critical strike damage from the 3 points we're putting in here in the tree, and then we're getting 3 additional ranks of this from our amulet. Moving down, we've got 3 points into Defiance for damage against elites, 3 points into Defensive Posture to increase the amount of Fortify that we gain, 3 points into Nature's Resolve for a chance to get more Fortify, 1 point to Grizzly Rage, 1 point to Prime Grizzly Rage, and then 1 point Supreme Grizzly Rage, and then we've got Earth and Might. So again, we're running the aspect that makes our Storm skills able to proc Earth and Might. So Earth and Might is going to restore all of our spirit and then guarantee us crits for 5 seconds whenever it procs. And then this chance is increased on critical strikes, and then if the target is stunned, immobilized, or knocked back. So yes, we are guaranteeing crits with Earth and Might, but we still want to stack crit chance because you're not always going to have Earth and Might up, so you don't want to be dealing no damage when you don't have Earth and Might. But also stacking that crit chance is going to increase your chance to proc Earth and Might. Now, a couple things. I think you could probably pretty easily drop both of these, Defensive Posture and Nature's Resolve. Nature's Resolve for sure, and go into some other stuff. You could get more healing with Circle of Life. You could put 1 point here and then put a couple points into Resonance to get a little bit more damage. Potentially, I toyed around with dropping Nature's Resolve completely and actually running Nature's Reach. because there's a decent amount of the time where you have tornadoes kind of going all over the place that are far away from you, dealing damage to enemies as you're kiting around, and Nature's Reach will be online at that point. For the Spirit Boons, for Deer, we're running Wariness, 10% reduced damage from elites. For Eagle, I'm actually running Iron Feather, 10% maximum life. You take this off, I'm sitting at 16,140 life right now. We're getting over 1,000 life out of that one Spirit Boon. Now, you could easily run Swooping Attacks, 10% attack speed. I ran this for a very long time. I found that the extra life, though, from Iron Feather, I liked better. For the Wolf, we're running Calamity. This will extend the duration of our Grizzly Rage by 25%. And then we're grabbing 2 boons in the snake tree here. So we've got Masochistic. Critical strikes with shape-shifting skills heal you for 3% maximum life, which is just insane healing. This is really what allows us to be in melee range all the time and keep us alive. And then we've got Calm Before the Storm, which is very important. On Lucky Hit, nature magic skills have up to a 10% chance to reduce the cooldown of your ultimate skill by 2 seconds. Again, another way to reduce the cooldown of our Grizzly Rage. All right, so for Paragon, now this is where you're going to see some differences than what you would normally see. I actually dropped the exploit glyph completely. I know that might sound kind of crazy, but we were able to pick up more damage reduction by doing so. And in this build, our Tornado will apply Vulnerable for us, so our core skill that we're spamming can already apply Vulnerable, and we can also apply Vulnerable on lucky hits. Now, we do lose some vulnerable damage not running Exploit, and you could easily put it back into the build if you want to, but this is just the setup that I settled on that I think is the most consistent and easy to run tier 100 Nightmare Dungeons. So for the first board, we're grabbing Territorial, which is going to give us damage reduction against close enemies and damage increase to close enemies per 5 decks within range. Moving up into Lust for Carnage, we're getting Lust for Carnage, which is going to give us Spirit back on Werewolf crits. The glyph here is going to be Werewolf, so damage reduction while in Werewolf form, and then increased damage while in Werewolf form as well. Also want to make sure that we get the attack speed here. Then up top, we've got the Thunderstruck board, which is going to give us some vulnerable damage in this cluster right here. And then Thunderstruck itself, which is more critical strike damage against vulnerable or immobilized enemies. Then we're going to path back through here later. So to the right, we path into the Heightened Malice board. So we get the glyph up top, which is going to be Fang and Claw. Going to increase the bonus to magic nodes within range. The most important thing here, it's increasing the damage reduction from poisoned enemies magic nodes. Then we're also getting increased damage to close enemies while in werewolf form. So from here, I would path down to Heightened Malice. So we get increased damage if there are 3 or more poisoned enemies nearby. This is Ancestral Guidance down here. I wouldn't get that first. I would actually make this our next board. This is the Inner Beast board. So I chose this here. A lot of times Constricting Tendrils board would go here instead, but I went with this board to get more defense. So this is where I put Undaunted. And again, this is probably where Exploit would be in a Constricting Tendrils board. This is going to give us a damage reduction based on the amount of Fortify that we have, and then also increased damage while fortified. But on this board, we can also get more armor, so there's armor here, and unfortunately I'm not getting all of the bonus, but you also get some more armor from the magic nodes close to it. Down here you get more armor and maximum life as well in this little cluster, so that's kind of why I went for this setup here. So once this board is attached, I would probably then go back down here and path down, get Reclamation, and then grab Ancestral Guidance. We're getting increased damage after spending 75 Spirit. And then you can path back into the Thunderstruck board up top here, get your last glyph, which is going to be Earth and Sky. This is going to give us increased damage to crowd-controlled or vulnerable enemies, but the most important part is that it's going to increase the bonus to magic nodes within range. Most importantly, damage reduction from vulnerable enemies. For elixirs, you have the option of going defensive or offensive. I would say if you're going to go defensive, you want to go with Iron Skin for armor, or you can go for increased maximum life as well. I don't have one at the moment to show you. For offensive elixirs, I would say either go for Combatant for the increased lucky hit chance, or you can go for attack speed. So anyways, guys, I think that's going to about wrap it up. I would say once you really get the damage reduction dialed in for this build, it's actually a very enjoyable build to push with. while you're pushing, just be careful of resource burn can be tough. Enemies decreasing your armor can be tough. Less damage while you're close, less physical damage. The main one you really don't probably want to run is less critical strike damage can be rough as well. And I would completely avoid the Lightning Storm affix. That's really annoying to play around. Stormbane can be pretty annoying too. Anything that kind of chases you around and deals damage can be tough. You can still do them, but definitely kind of throws a wrench into things at times. So thank you guys very much for watching, and I will see you next time.